reaction. It seemed like from the group. And Juju and Kennedy were both kind of saying we sort of expected this. I guess what did you think when you see them just kind of mutedly respond?
I mean, look, it's unbelievable to have 1,000 people in here. It's not lost on us at all that we've earned a 1 seed for the second year in a row. I think there's so much gratitude to be playing at home, excitement for what we're going to do. But I can't speak for them. For me, I never thought I'd be a 1 seed and feel disrespected. But I thought the committee, I thought there would be very little chance we would be the number 4 overall, number 1. And so, we've got a big game here on Saturday against UNCG, and we'll handle it accordingly. But you tell me if you think that bracket that we got should have been the one that it was. I can't.
The answer, Coach G, is no. But I'm going to explain why that happened. I'm also going to break down our games within our bracket. Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk USC Women's Basketball. It's your girl, Cece, and let's get into it right now. Okay, here's an article that came out. NCAA approves paying women's tourney teams. This happened January 15, 2025. Women's basketball teams finally will be paid for playing games in the NCAA tournament each March, just like the men have for years under a plan approved Wednesday at the NCAA convention. South Carolina coach Dawn Staley, whose Gamecocks went undefeated winning last year's national championship and her third overall, said her first thought of hearing the vote was a simple yes. Okay, right on, Dawn, right on. So-called performance units will represent revenue, will be given to women's teams playing in a tournament starting this year, the event's 43rd edition. A team that reaches the Final Four could bring its conference roughly $1.26 million over the next 3 years in financial performance. Remember that, because it's a key. In the first year, $15 million will be awarded to teams out of the fund, which is 26% of the women's basketball media revenue deal. Media revenue deal. That will grow to $25 million or 41% of revenue by 2028. The 26% is on par with what men's basketball teams received the first year that they started getting paid. Now, an ACC coach. Still, North Carolina coach Courtney Banghart, who also is the president of the Women's Basketball Coaches Association, called the reality of postseason units a great day and reward for the investment of the athletic departments. The women's March Madness plan is similar to the men's basketball unit program. Each of the 32 conferences that receive an automatic bid to the tournament will receive a unit. And additional units will be rewarded for teams that receive at-large bids to the 68-team field. The longer a school's tournament run lasts, the more units the school's conference receives. Conferences decide the distribution of the unit revenue to each of its members. Each unit was worth about $2 million for the 2024 men's tournament. Okay, now remember I said that. Now I want to show you something. Here is the committee members. Dorita Radcliffe Dawkins. Remember that name. Dorita Radcliffe Dawkins. She was the vice chair. She represents the SCT out of University of Arkansas, right? And then you have Danae Barakato, deputy director of athletics for Northwestern University. She is our committee member representing the Big Ten. She has no skin in the game. Northwestern didn't even make the tournament. So she could care less because her team's not going to make any money, right? So why would she speak up on anything regarding where teams get placed? She has no skin in the game. As a matter of fact, I bet you she was the ultimate decision maker in Northwestern not coming to LA to play the LA schools when the fires were going on, even though Penn State did and even though they were out of harm's way. So just remember that, right? I'm saying that to tell you guys this. Hold your thought for a second. I'm going to switch to a different screen. Look, who owns the SEC network? ESPN, right? ESPN owns the SEC network. So wouldn't it be to their advantage to get more teams through the tournament than any other team? Wouldn't it be to their advantage to get South Carolina and Texas to the Final Four if that was possible? Of course it would, right? It's about business. That's why the brackets were set up the way they were set up. This is about money, right? Again, who was the vice chair of the selection committee? right? She's from the SEC. And Big Ten had no skin in the game because the person that was on the committee, their team didn't even make it to the tournament. So who cares, right? She doesn't care. Now let's get into it even further. Okay, let's look at the brackets, right? UCLA was a top number 1 overall seed. Now they deserved it, and I've been saying all along that they had the better resume than South Carolina. But they had to be placed in the number 1 overall seed for South Carolina to avoid UConn, right? This whole thing is set up because South Carolina got booty smacked by Connecticut, and the ESPN, SEC, the chair of the committee wanted to make sure that they did not have to face UConn anywhere in their bracket until they made it to the Final Four. That's why this was done the way it was done. That's why USC is a number 4th 1 seed, placing them in UConn's bracket, and why UConn is all the way over on the other side, not having anything to do with UConn. Now, if the committee did the right thing and would have placed Southern Cal here, then you would have had a final 8 game of South Carolina USC, which would have made more sense to have them meet up in the regional 8, right, instead of the Final 4, because that way whatever team wins would have to go through would have to go through UConn or UCLA in the Final 4. This is all political, guys. This is all political. And I'm going to say that with my chest out. It's political. It's about money, right? They didn't want no parts of UConn anywhere on this side of the bracket. Period, point blank. Because UConn is a good tournament team. Let's not lie about that. Let's not, sugarcoat it. They're a good tournament team. And nobody wanted to see South Carolina get spanked again before reaching the Final Four by UConn. UConn probably has their number. Now, also, I just want to point out that South Carolina being placed here, right, as the number 1 overall seed. Also, if they were the number 1 overall seed over here, again, and Southern Cal was the 4th, again, they would be facing Southern Cal as the regional 8 or UConn, right? Because UConn was going to be placed as the strongest number 2 seed. So they were going in the 4th bracket anyway. It didn't matter. So the whole thing was centered around where do we put South Carolina and Texas to keep them away from UConn. And so that's why they did that. That's why they did that. If Texas was over here, if UCLA was the number 1 overall seed and they placed Texas as the number 1, they would have to play UConn, right? Again, in the final 8. And UConn is going to beat Texas. Texas is probably the weakest number 1 out of the entire group, in my opinion, and I have a right to my opinion. So either way it goes, this was all set up politically for South Carolina or Texas, an SEC team, to get to the Final Four against either a Big Ten team or, I'm going to say, UConn. Period, point blank. It's about money. And then therefore the SEC thinks that they would have a better shot beating a Big Ten team, even though UCLA and UConn spanked South Carolina. So the hope is that South Carolina makes it to the Final Four where they would place Texas. South Carolina would win, right, and play either UCLA, Southern Cal, or UConn. And their hope is that they would face UCLA or UConn, the 2 teams that they lost to, making that for the best final. But that's not going to be the best final. The best final scenario would have been USC, UConn, because that was the highest rated basketball game this year. But neither one of those teams are what? SEC teams. So they have no affiliation with ESPN. Therefore, you're messing with the money. That's all it is, guys. I'm telling you, that's all it is. It's about the money. So, and if you look at South Carolina's bracket, who here can beat them? Duke. So they can float all the way through here till they get to Duke. Maryland, if they play Maryland ball, but their injuries have really hurt them, they could have a shot with their style of play. But Indiana could come back and surprise South Carolina if South Carolina has a bad game. But South Carolina, the way they like to get out and run and the way they play defense, this path right here, to me, is the easiest path to get to the Final Four, even over UCLA's. This was set up. They had to put South Carolina here. They took care of South Carolina, guys. I'm telling you, they took care of South Carolina. You know, that this is the easiest path right here. UCLA's path is pretty, they got to face Ole Miss, but there's nobody in this bracket, nobody, including LSU, that can play with Lauren Betts. Lauren Betts is just too big. Even though she doesn't like going out in the lava, she likes to stay in the paint, in the water. You know, she doesn't like going out outside of the paint area. But she did it against USC in that third game. Finally, we saw Lauren Betts, when they were doubling and throwing two at you, go out into the lava, go outside the paint area. But, you know, LSU, maybe, you know, but Anissa Morrow, she's not going to be able to contend with Lauren Betts. She's too small, you know. And Ole Miss, even though they're good defensively and they're going to make it ugly, I can't see them getting past UCLA. Maybe I'll be surprised, and maybe there will be an upset, you know, in this bracket. Who knows? But I just think, you know, UCLA is going to go to the final, which they should, because the top overall number one seed should have the easiest path to the Final Four. But they also made South Carolina a number one overall seed by looking at their path. There's just, you know, and then Texas, here you got Texas, right? Texas, there's nobody in here. Let me see, Texas, they lost to Notre Dame, but Notre Dame is in the bottom half of the bracket, right? And Notre Dame's going to have to face TCU, which I think TCU, no, they didn't play. TCU lost to Kansas State, by the way, so that's a whole nother issue that I'm not even going to talk about. But TCU lost to Kansas State, which is a number 7 seed, right? Or a number 5 seed, and they lost to Oklahoma State, which is a number 7 seed, right? So I don't know. Shouldn't they be like the worst number 2, in my opinion, or up here and have Duke down here? I mean, I just the way they did these brackets, I don't know. And so here, you know, you have Southern Cal, the 4th number 1 overall seed, which they shouldn't be. They should be over here with Texas, but they couldn't put Texas over here because then they would have to face UConn, right? And Kentucky. And I think Kentucky and UConn can beat Texas. And Oklahoma can beat Texas as well. So Southern Cal has to go through a gauntlet to get to the Final Four. Again, having to face UConn, who they played last year in the Regional 8, who they played this year already, and who they'll have to play again. To me, this makes no sense. And if you're talking about revenue, that would be the matchup. But because it's talking about revenue, and because Southern Cal is a Big Ten team and UConn is a Big East team, that affects the revenue going to the SEC. And again, who owns the SEC? ESPN. Guys, this is a sham deal. And I don't care how you come at me in the comments. This is what I truly believe, and we'll see what happens. But that being said, now I'm going to just go ahead and break down the Southern California bracket matchups for the first round, and pick who I think is going to win each game, and we'll keep it moving. Okay, let's talk about the Southern Cal UNC Greensboro game. We should win this game handily. UNC Greensboro, they are a good team. They did win their conference championship. They won their conference outright as well. They don't have a lot of size. I think they have one girl that's 6'4", which they try and feed a lot. Other than that, they're not that big. As they have maybe a 6'3" girl and a 5'11" girl, but a lot of their guards are 5'9" and under. They're not a transition team. They don't like to get out and run at all. They like to sit up half court and play at pace. As a matter of fact, their pay of place is in the 1 percentile in the entire NCAA, which is the lowest you can go. So that tells you that they are not a transition team at all. They take about 18 three-pointers a game, and they're really good with their corner threes, but that's where they're most efficient, on their corner threes. They take about 17 free throws a game. They take 35 two-pointers a game, but their mid-range is not that efficient. Their bench does offer 24 points a game, so they do have a pretty good bench. But they only average 9 assists a game, which tells me that they're not, excuse me, in a good team as far as passing the ball around. I didn't get a chance to watch what type of offense that they run, but that tells me that either they do a lot of dribble drive or they try and feed it into the post. They average 13 turnovers a game. Fast break points, they only average 5 fast break points. Again, that correlates to them not being a transition offense. They average 13 turnovers a game, which is pretty good. At the rim, they're shooting 57%. In the paint, 28%, which is not very effective at all. Mid-range, they're shooting about 33%, and their corner threes are, like I said, where they're most efficient. They're shooting 38% from the field. So if we do our job defensively, this should be a relatively easy game for us heading into the next game, which would be Cal or Mississippi State. So I'm going to talk about that game and who I think is going to win that game next. Okay, for the Mississippi State Cal game, I pulled up a comparison chart, and what I did is I'm comparing them based on their quad 1 games and their conference regular season games. And as you can see here, here's Cal and here's Mississippi State. Cal hasn't been a very good team versus quad 1 opponents. Hold on a minute, let me change this because I didn't change it for Mississippi State in conference and quad 1. Okay, so here's their quad 1 and conference regular season games, right? And as you can see, they're as far as their offensive rating, they're very close. Pace of play, they're very close. Mississippi State's a little bit better, which tells me they like to get out and transition and run a little bit, but they also do like to go to their half court offense. They have a 6'6" post, who's pretty decent. And so they like to feed her as much as possible, and she can put the ball on the ground too. She has really good footwork. Cal is not a good offensive rebounding percentage, offensive rebounding team, whereas because of Mississippi State's height, they're a better offensive rebounding team. So if we were to play Mississippi State, I think Clarice would get a lot of minutes here. As far as their scoring. Versus quad 1 opponents, again, Cal has not been very good. You see, this is all in the red, and they want to be in the green. They do well with their paint points and their percentage of points in the paint. Mississippi State has been a better team versus quad 1 teams and against their conference opponents. So again, the paints and the point come from their size. They have a lot of size. Cal doesn't have a lot of size. They have a post. I think she's about 6'3", though. She's not a big post and not comparable to their 6'6" posts that they have. Points per game, 67 and 70 for Mississippi State, so relatively close. Again, Cal's not a good offensive rebounding team, where Mississippi State is. They're a really good offensive rebounding team, but that's because of their size. Defensive rebounding, Cal is a pretty good defensive rebounding team as compared to Mississippi State. Steals, they're not that good of a defensive team, whereas Mississippi State, they're better in creating turnovers. Now, this has been Cal's pain point all year long. They average 18 turnovers a game. They do turn the ball over a lot, and that hasn't changed all season. But look at this. So does Mississippi State. Personal fouls, they average 17 personal fouls a game, and Mississippi State averages 17. This is a tough game to call. The thing that Cal likes to do is they like to get out and they like to shoot the three. They have really good three-point shooters. As you can see, they take 23 three-pointers a game, and they average 31%, which is pretty decent. In conference play, they average 33. Same with Mississippi State, though. Although they don't take as many threes, a little bit less, their percentage is lower. But in conference, their percentage was the same. So this is going to be a really closely matched game, and it's going to be interesting to see who pulls this out. I think Mississippi State is going to win this game. if Cal's coming in and not hitting their threes. But I do give the edge to Mississippi State on this game. Next game on the ticket is Kansas State versus Fairfield. Now, this is a real interesting matchup because Kansas State, they like to play with pace in the half court. That's where their pace is in the half court, especially when Aoka Lee is playing, and she is going to be back for the tourney. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how much playing time she actually gets because she is prone to injury. She's not that fast. When I watch her play, she's not that fast. She does have good footwork on the inside, but the Big 12 doesn't have that many players with size. So it's going to be interesting to see when they come up against a Kentucky or a USC, how she can play against someone her size. That being said, Fairfield doesn't have anybody of size. They play a 5-out offense, and they're a dribble drive, shoot, go type of offense. Their pace is a slower pace. They like to run half court offense, but like I said, they run a 5-out, and they're a very fun team to watch. I think that Fairfield can surprise some teams in this tournament, and I think that Fairfield can surprise Kansas State if they play the way they did in their tournament. So I don't know who's going to win this game. It's going to be such a fun game to watch. I think that a lot of people are sleeping on Fairfield. I do think Kansas State has an opportunity to beat them if they play well, but you can't count out Fairfield. And as you can see against Quad 1, they're even with Kansas State against Quad 1 teams. Their offensive rating, Kansas State is a 94 and they're 98.8. They both suck on defensive, although in conference Fairfield was better, but they had a weak conference. But against Quad 1, they're so bad defensively. And Kansas State is not a good defensive team as well. As you can see, both teams play at the slower pace, half-court offense. Their turnover percentage, Kansas State, they turn the ball over 18% of their possessions. Fairfield, 21% of their possessions. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. Points off turnovers. Fairfield is really good with their points off turnovers. Turnovers per game. Fairfield averages 15 a game, and Kansas State averages 14 a game. Rebounding is another key figure. In Quad 1 games, so that's against good Division 1 teams. Fairfield is not very good. They're only averaging 19 because they have no size. They're only averaging 19 defensive rebounds a game. Offensive rebounds, again, not very good in Quad 1 games, which is, in the tournament, that's like who you're playing. You're playing against Quad 1 teams. So, again, and Aoka Lee here, with her not playing, they're not a very good offensive rebounding team. With her playing, I think they're a better offensive rebounding team, so that's going to be interesting to see. Now, Kansas State, they're a good team as far as passing the ball around. They average 15 assists a game. Fairfield is not. Like I said, they run that 5-out. They do a lot of dribble drive. And so that's going to be interesting to watch as well. Aoka Lee and her blocks are good. So, excuse me, I'm still fighting a cold, guys. And then 3-pointers is always an important stat. Quad 1 games, Kansas State has not been very good in Quad 1 games. But in conference games, they were really good. So they don't get to the free throw line a lot, especially in Quad 1 games, and they're a terrible free throw shooting team. So Fairfield is a little bit better, but they don't shoot a lot of free throws a game against Quad 1 teams, 10. So this is going to be an interesting game because it's really two totally different styles from two totally different teams. I expect Kansas State to win this game, but I expect Fairfield to go out fighting. So on to the next. The next game in the bracket is number 4 Kentucky versus number 13 Liberty. We took a look at their stat comparisons. Again, Quad 1 games, Liberty is just not that good. Their pace of play is a little bit faster, which tells me that they do like to run a little bit. In conference, they weren't, though, so that's going to be pretty interesting to see. Defensive rating against Quad 1 games, not very good. Offensive rating, Quad 1 games, not very good. Kentucky has a good offensive rating for quad one games. Their pace of play is pretty good. It's in the green. They have an effective field goal percentage of 49.8, which is pretty decent. Offensive rebounding is kind of surprising to me at 25.8, considering they have a pretty good post in Strack, and their turnover percentage is pretty good. So again, they're not a transition team. They have Georgia Amore, which she's a WNBA first rounder. She dictates that office. She also is a playmaker, and she can shoot the three. She is small, so it's going to be interesting to see as we get further into the tournament how defenders defend against her. As you can see here, Kentucky offensive rebounds again against quad one teams is not very good. Defensive rebounding is. Steals is not very good. Blocks is real good because they have a good post. But here, Liberty, not very good across the board when you're talking about against quad one competition. So I expect UK, University of Kentucky, to win this game, and I expect them to win it pretty easily. Okay, next we have Iowa versus Murray State, the 6 versus 11. Now, Murray State won their conference championship, but they were not the overall conference winners. They just won their conference tourney. And it's interesting to me because Murray State, they only played 2 quad one games, and they played LSU, and they lost to LSU by like 14, and they played Alabama and lost by 27, and that was it. The other thing that's interesting to me is Murray State, they don't have anybody over 6'1". Their tallest player is 61, and they only have one player that's 6'1". All their other players are 5'7", 5'4", 5'8". They have another player that's 6 foot, so they're a really, really small team. So again, I think that the committee, this Murray State being an 11 seed is odd to me. They're more like a 14 seed. So that's interesting. And then Iowa got that as a 6 seed. So Iowa should win this game with ease. As you can see, Murray State's quad one is not very good, although Iowa is not that very good on their quad one games. However, towards the end of the season, after that USC game, they've been playing really, really well. Lucy Olson has found her footing, has found her fit, and they're playing really, really well. So I expect them to win this game with ease. I'm not really going to go over the stats here. As you can see here, quad one games, Iowa is not very good defensively. They've never been a strong defensive team. Even in the Caitlin Clark years, they never played defense. Now they're getting better this year. They're kind of focusing on it a little bit more this year, but they're still not a strong defensive team, as shows by their stats right here. So I don't expect Murray State to give Iowa any sort of problem whatsoever. I think that Iowa will win this game with ease. And as you can see with pace of play, though, both of them like to run. Murray State, because they're so small, they like to get out. So that's going to be interesting to see how Iowa contends with Murray State's transition game. So, but I expect Iowa to win this game. Okay, the next game, we have the 3 seed Oklahoma versus the number 14 seed FGCU. Now, cool story about FGCU, if you don't know, Carlos Smesco, he left that team after building that program. It's always been a strong program for how many ever years he was there, and he left that team to go coach in the WNBA at Atlanta. Now, the coach that took over still took them to the conference, outright conference win and the conference tournament championship. However, duly noted, they did not play one quad one game in the entire season. No Power 4 teams whatsoever was on their schedule. And they won. And the other thing about this team is they have no player over 6'1". Again, they're a guard-heavy team, no post, and they like to shoot the three. Oklahoma should have their way with this team. It should be a pretty easy win for them. They're not going to have anybody that's going to be able to contain Betts. Lauren Betts is going to have a field day with them. And I think, for to go for coach. There we go. Pull up their stats real quick. I think that, as you can see, their quad one, they're all in the red in almost every category except defense. But they they didn't really play any quad one games, so it's interesting to me. I think it was Montana State, if you want to call that a quad one game. I don't know. But as you can see, they're going to be totally out. Look at the pace. Like I said, Oklahoma, even though they have Reagan beers, they like to get out and run. They're at 100. I think they must drink about 5 cups of coffee and 3 Red Bulls before they get on the court. They're the highest scoring NCAA team per game. And look at this, totally opposite, right? They're at a 56 with their pace. Oklahoma is going to run them into the ground. They're just not going to be able to stay with them. As you can see, this points in the paint. Reagan Beers is their post player, but they still like to get out and run on transition. And the other thing about Oklahoma is they don't hesitate in shooting the ball. If they can get the ball down the court and shoot within the first 10 seconds of their 24-second clock or 30-second clock, 24-second clock, that's what they're going to do. They're going to shoot the ball as fast as they can. Right? The blocks, defensive rebounds, very good. 99 percentile. Offensive rebounds, 85 percentile. Assists per game, 20.5 assists per game. That's just outstanding, right? Points per game, 81.9 for quad one, right? So that, that tells you what they're doing to quad one other teams. And look at Florida Gulf Coast, just everything in the red except for offensive rebounds, which they're not going to be able to offensive rebound against Oklahoma. They're just too good. So this is another mismatch to me. I'm not sure how this happened. But again, the committee doing the committee things. This is an SEC team. So, of course, they're going to set this game up for Oklahoma to win. My bad. It is a 30-second. I get the NBA and college mixed up. It's 30 seconds for women and 24 seconds for NBA. So just wanted to clarify that. I do know what I'm talking about. I just get confused sometimes. Okay. Now, here's something that I want to bring to your attention that I don't understand again with seeding. Here you have Oklahoma State that is seeded number 7. Playing South Dakota State, right? But here, of course, in South Carolina's bracket, you have West Virginia, who is seeded a 6th seed. Now, why am I bringing that up? Because 3 reasons. Oklahoma State placed 3rd in their conference, right? In the Big 12. I'm looking at it right now. They placed 3rd with a 14-4 record. They beat West Virginia. They beat Baylor. They beat TCU. So why are they a 7th seed and why is West Virginia a 6th seed? Oklahoma State should be over in that other bracket over there where South Carolina is. But of course they're not going to do that, right? Of course they're not going to do that. So instead they put them in Southern Cal's bracket, to just make it even more muddy. So again, politics, right? But this makes no sense to me. Why they would put Oklahoma State as a number 7 seed when they beat Baylor. They beat all the higher seed. They beat Baylor. They beat West Virginia. They beat, TCU? They beat all the top teams, but yet they have them as a 7. I say mind-boggling a lot because that's how confused my brain is as to what the committee was thinking and why they did that. Why would they do that? Why would they put Oklahoma State as a 7, right? When they should be probably a 6 or a 5 and make West Virginia the 5 seed. It just makes no sense. Is it because of the conference tournament championship? So then they actually did weigh the tourney championship more than anything else, than their whole body of work? The same that they did with Southern Cal, because UCLA beat them in the final tournament. That makes them drop down to a final number 1. Make it make sense. It just makes no sense to me what this committee was thinking. But anyways, as we go to the analytics of this game, I expect Oklahoma State Cowgirls to win. South Dakota State is a good team. They like to shoot the threes, and so I think it's going to be an interesting game. As far as quad 1, Oklahoma State, they're in the red as far as where they're scoring in quad 1. But as far as overall quad 1, their net rating, they're in the green. Their defensive rating for quad 1, they're in the green. South Dakota State, they're really, really bad. They have a really bad defensive rating against quad 1 games. And so, I expect Oklahoma State to win this game. I expect them to win it. It's going to be a close game though, because South Dakota State always comes in and play hard with their style of play. They're gritty. They like to shoot the three. As you can see here, they're in the 98th percentile when shooting their three-pointers. They shoot about 17 three-pointers a game. So their pace of play is also slow. Well, yeah, they're right in the middle. They're 69. But they like to run that half-court offense when necessary. And I expect South Dakota State to lose this game to Oklahoma State. I still believe Oklahoma State should be a higher seed. And I think, again, it's about politics and the way the brackets had to measure out for South Carolina to make it to the Final Four. And the final game in this bracket, as you can see, number 2, UConn versus Arkansas State. UConn should win this handily, easily. I will show you the CBB analytics to this game. But as you can see, Arkansas State, no quad 1 games at all. No quad 1 games at all. So they don't even have the experience to even contend with a UConn. And UConn is going to win this game, and they're going to win it easily. In conference, they are really good, though. They have an offensive rating of 98.7. Points in the paint. They're not very good in points in the paint. And turnovers per game, they average 16.7. And I have a feeling that UConn is going to play really good defense and take Arkansas State to school. So should be a pretty interesting game. Hey, look, now I know that, I'm biased and, I this is Let's Talk USC Women's Basketball, so of course I'm going to be biased. But all things being, level and, what I said at the beginning about politics and money, I hold that to my heart. I believe it's the truth. ESPN holds the media rights to the SEC channel. They own the network. Everything has to level up so SEC teams make it to the Final Four, therefore making more money for their teams and their conference, to disperse amongst each other. So, it is what it is. Second year in a row that USC was the 4th number 1 seed. Last year I could see it. This year I cannot. They should have been the number 3 overall number 1 seed, period, point blank. Some of the other matches and matchups in the bracket just don't jive, just don't make sense. Just like I said, the Oklahoma State one doesn't make sense to me, how they got the lower seed over West Virginia when they beat all the top teams in the tournament. Just doesn't, all the top teams in the conference doesn't make sense to me. There's a lot of that going on, to make sure that specific teams go as far as possible in the tournament. But that's okay. USC is going to get through it. We're gonna make it to the Final Four this year. I totally believe that. And I'll be covering it moving forward. I'll be doing videos and so on and so forth. Please leave your comments below, share, like this video, but please keep your comments respectful. I do not tolerate any hateful comments on my channel. If there are, I will delete the comment and I will report you. So that being all said, hey, fight on.
Yeah, it is the expectation. I think we know what we're capable of. It's just a matter of knowing who's next and tackling that day by day.